So within Unit 3, there are 3 specific examples of what are referred to as Islamic gunpowder empires. There's the Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal. We're going to look at the example of the Ottoman to understand where they came from, how they expanded, how they legitimized their rule, and then how they administered their vast empire. Now, the Ottomans began as nomadic warriors, and in the year 1300, Osman became the ruler of these peoples who had conquered different sections of Anatolia. From Osman, we get Ottoman. Now, the reality is that the Ottomans were taking advantage of a weakening Byzantine Empire in Greece, Bulgaria, and the Balkans. They had bypassed Constantinople itself. You can see here, in between, right on the Black Sea, that's where Constantinople would be. So they bypassed them, and they focused on conquering Christian lands in Greece and the Balkans. And by 1400, really, Constantinople is all that's left. Now, the Ottomans technically professed loyalty to the Byzantine Emperor during this time. 1453 is when the charade ends. The Byzantine Emperor requested double the usual payment of tribute from the Turks, and so the Ottomans decided enough is enough. Mehmet II, who becomes known as Mehmet the Conqueror, built a fort on the western edge of the Bosphorus and positioned 3 large cannon, like you see here. 3 large cannon just outside the walls of the city so that they could attack resupply ships. The Byzantines did use their giant chain that they would pull tight on the Bosphorus to block Ottoman ships, but the ships were simply transported overland in wooden crates to waters just outside the city and reassembled. 80,000 Ottomans laid siege to about 8,000 Byzantines and their allies for about 53 days. Meanwhile, these 3 cannon are pounding, bombarding the walls of Constantinople. Mehmet did offer a chance to surrender, but the Byzantine Emperor refused. However, even after breaching the walls, the Ottoman troops were well disciplined and showed a lot of restraint. They didn't want to sack the city, they wanted to rule the city. They simply conquered it, and Mehmet turned many churches into mosques, and the city became Muslim. So this is how Constantinople becomes Istanbul. And the Hagia Sophia goes from one of the greatest and largest Christian churches in the world to one of the most mighty mosques in the world. As far as their expansion is concerned as a land-based empire, cavalry was the dominant force of the military due to their nomadic traditions, but the navy did also come to dominate. By the 1500s, the Ottoman navy really dominated the Black Sea and portions of the Mediterranean, and it also defeated Christian forces in the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the Indian Ocean. It was also during this time that they beat back the threat of the Safavid Empire, setting a precedent that the area we know as Iraq is going to continually become a contested war zone. The Ottoman are Sunni, Safavid are Shia, so that early split within the faith comes back to dominate 2 empires and be used as a source of conflict. The big thing that's used is gunpowder, and there's a reason why the Ottoman are called an Islamic gunpowder empire. The use of weapons like muskets and cannon are going to lead to a more professional military force. To continue their expansion, Sultan Suleiman, seen here, and he was the son of the man who defeated the Safavids. Suleiman was their master strategist who used aggression to his advantage. His armies pushed into Central Europe and modern-day Serbia and Hungary, and they even threatened the Austrian Habsburg Empire. They laid siege to Vienna, but the Viennese repelled them in 1529. Now, in their quest to conquer the Mediterranean basin, a European fleet under Spanish command defeated the Ottoman navy in 1571, but the Ottomans remained a viable military threat in Europe. Later Ottoman historians would look back on the reign of Suleiman and declare that he ran the empire at its height, and his administration was perfect. But this really was more a reflection of how these historians felt about their current governments, not necessarily that of Suleiman himself. So expansion-wise, they had different phases of power within their military: cavalry, strong navy, use of gunpowder weapons. To demonstrate legitimacy, the devshirme, which translates technically to child levy or blood tax, we refer to it as the gathering. This is when Ottoman officials would descend on Christian villages in the Balkans. So Greece, Serbia, Albania, they would descend on these Christian villages they had conquered. They would require the priest to present the birth records of all boys aged 8 to 18. They'd select a certain number of them and bring them back to Istanbul. These boys were then circumcised, converted to Islam, given a Muslim name, and they began a rigorous training program that would prepare them for work either as administrators or soldiers. And this practice continued a long-standing Muslim tradition of using prisoners of war, so using POWs as slaves. And this is partially because they were not allowed to use Turkish slaves. The education for these positions could last as long as 14 years, and these slaves became fully integrated into the empire. Now, the positions were very prestigious, and generally speaking, the kids were well off. There were families who volunteered their sons for this gathering, and some Muslim families even tried to get their sons enrolled. However, you see this phrase, still despised. This took a toll on Christian families and was despised by many, since the Greeks viewed the Turks as barbarians, and they viewed conversion to Islam as shameful. To avoid the system, some boys will marry at a young age. Priests conveniently lost some records, and sometimes these Eastern Orthodox Christians appeal to the Pope for help. The system kind of abates by the mid-1600s, but the resentment will last into the 20th century. Now, of these soldiers, some became janissaries. These janissaries, these enslaved Christians who trained year-round, became skilled in the use of gunpowder weapons. That's what distinguishes them. So these are mainly youth from the Balkans or the Caucasus region. They're used to meet the demand for more soldiers. And relying on slaves as elite soldiers was an old tradition, because a sultan might not be able to rely on his brothers or sons. They're constantly jockeying for power. Their loyalty to the sultan was absolute, because they would be killed if they weren't loyal. They were required to remain celibate, so they couldn't build up private estates or even have descendants. And serving as a janissary offered much higher social standing than remaining on a family farm. So the janissaries are used to maintain power throughout the empire, but to prove legitimacy, dominance over different peoples. Now finally, we arrive at administration. Now the Ottoman are Sunni, and as such they are ruled by sultans who claim to be caliphs, since they controlled the major pilgrimage sites of the faith. The Ottoman control Mecca, Medina, Jerusalem. The caliphs take their supervisory duties very seriously, and they claim to be earthly successors to the prophet. Now the sultan rules as absolute monarch, but the vizier, or the main advisor, advisor, is the head of state. And janissaries could even rise to this level. The main issue is how to stabilize rule over large areas that had differing religious and legal traditions. Suleiman was, Suleiman the Great, because he was successful in combat, But he also took the court to another level and balanced the need for central authority with local autonomy. Turkish is the language of administration and the military. Arabic is the language of theology and philosophy. Persian is the language of poetry and the arts. He brings peace and stability to the empire, and his officials gain power through merit and talent instead of lineage, just like the Mongols. He allowed local Christian and Jewish populations to govern their own affairs, as long as they paid their taxes and remained loyal to the Sultan. And the population overall is, it's made up of Jews and Christians and Muslims. They're referred to as the Riaya, or flock of sheep. And Jews will flood into the empire in large numbers after their expulsion from Spain in 1492. When it comes to, source of power, their military success, they have three pillars. That's this military tripod. Mounted Turkish archers who received land after completing service, Janissaries who are paid from the treasury and have the gunpowder weapons, and then the sailors who manned the navy. And they usually were commanded by a North African. Under the land grant system in which cavalrymen would gain land, they were the ones who handled administration in the Balkans and Anatolia. So the cavalry would administer certain lands. They kept order. They collected taxes and would report for each campaign using money they had collected. And this practice of allowing locals to collect taxes and sell these rights to the highest bidder is known as tax farming and was used by the Ottomans. So we have their administration, we have how they legitimized their rule and how they expanded. What we have here is a textbook example of one of three Islamic gunpowder empires. Yes, there are differences between them, but certainly the Ottoman stand out as unique in their own right.